Power BI is the most highly decorated and complete analytics and business intelligence engine on the planet when coupled with Azure Synapse. But there are certainly some missteps and design considerations we'd like to help you avoid when doing your deployments. Over the next several video blogs, my colleague and I are going to discuss the pros and cons of different architectures for your Synapse and Power BI deployments. Let's go. Welcome back, and thanks again for checking out my channel where I discuss Azure, data topics, and sometimes a little professional development. I really appreciate all the support. Thank you very much, but keep sharing out these videos, keep subscribing to the channel, keep socializing with me on Twitter and LinkedIn and all these great platforms, because everything really helps, and it helps us to motivate and build more content just for you. So let's jump in for today. Hey everybody, today I'm excited to be joined by my friend and colleague here at Microsoft, Chris Chalmers. Chris is an intelligence TS that specializes in Power BI, and he's truly in the trenches every day with our customers, helping them to build the right solutions for their business and really maximizing their investment in the Microsoft Analytics stack. Chris, you want to say hi?
I do. Thanks for having me. And yeah, it's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to be in this role. I basically get to talk about Power BI with customers all day long, as we're doing right now. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, awesome. And you know, I think this is going to be a great discussion today, where we get a chance to kind of look at a few different ways to architect these solutions out with your Power BI and your Synapse deployments, and figuring out what's going to work best, or at least give you some lead in to what's going to work best for your organization. So, Chris, you want to kind of go through at a high level what we're going to talk through?
Yeah, absolutely. So for very large data sets, right? So for cloud data warehouses with the billions, the tens of billions, the hundreds of billions of rows, getting the kind of response time that doesn't turn end users away, right? So not every BI organization has an SLA with their user community, but what I can say is based on experiences with websites, we know that websites really start losing users if there's more than like a 5-second delay, right? So it's like, gosh, I want to get really great interactive BI performance, but I also want to make available, real granularity, right? I work with a lot of retail and consumer good customers, and we're talking about, down to the item level potentially in terms of their analytics. So we're seeing a couple different approaches in the marketplace. There's been a lot of innovation on the Microsoft side in multiple areas. So that's kind of the whole of the problem. So is that what you're thinking there, Chris?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny. I think it's a generational thing, right? I think that we are getting less patient as a generation. Now, understandably, we want to have our analytics at the snap of a finger, right? We want to have that one-click, one-touch experience to get that information as quick as possible, right? So I think it really ties to that. But I think that as we were chatting through the show notes and stuff, you've got some really interesting strategies on how to approach it. So do you want to just kick things off with the first example you've got there?
So what we're looking at here is a real common architecture. This is obviously with Azure Synapse right in the middle of it, where it should be. However, there are other cloud data warehouses that have a similar architecture. So you bring data into the warehouse. Who knew? Okay. What's interesting over here is the connection between the BI layer, which is represented by Power BI in the wrong color, or Tableau. So these represent BI tools. This is the warehouse, and then this is the teeny tiny arrow. So we would call this model direct query, because you're querying directly from the BI tool into the warehouse, right? And there's been a lot of performance innovation, specifically on the Synapse side, about result sets caching and materialized views. So these are two relatively recent advancements in our Microsoft's cloud data warehouse solution that are delivering incredible BI performance over really large data sets. And I actually recorded a video. I call this the billion row demo I actually started stopwatch. So you can see I didn't play any games with video speed or anything like that. And what you're seeing is Power BI inside of Azure Synapse Studio, slicing and dicing a 30 billion row data set, and performance was great. These recent innovations are exceedingly helpful.
So from an architectural standpoint, you're using direct query with
That's
your
right.
Power BI visualization tool, tapping directly into Synapse. So you're not modeling any of the data in Power BI itself, right?
I'm not storing any of the data in
Thank
Power
you.
BI
Yep. Okay.
itself.
Yep.
Yeah,
Good clarification. And so we're tapping into the Synapse backend,
right.
essentially, that's storing the data. And we're getting the results that are that snappy and fast because we're taking advantage of services like result set caching and materialized views, correct?
That's right. That's
Okay,
absolutely
great.
right.
Great. Just
Yeah.
want to make sure I was clear on that.
Yeah. And so again, things to like about this architecture. There's no data movement, right? We talked about having a copy of the data in the warehouse and having a copy of the data in the BI tool. There's no latency, because your visualization layer is going directly against the native underlying database, so it is as up to date as the materialized views are in Synapse, which I understand is not necessarily real time. But conceptually, the latency is basically as fast as the materialized view, and it's simple. It's so easy. Can I say so easy a caveman can do it? As
Yeah,
long as I,
and that's a
as
good
long as I
point,
don't
right?
mention
Is
that.
that
Yeah,
it's about simplifying the architecture.
yeah,
So one thing that's important to note here about that is the value of using direct query is that now you can consume that data with your visualization tool just as fast as Synapse can process it, right? And when we
yes,
talk about Synapse being able to process massive amounts of data, we've got 60 worker nodes that are spanning that data across those nodes, distributing the data so that it can return the results of those queries very, very quickly. Okay.
hmm
Now, one of the drawbacks of loading all of that data into memory, which we'll kind of get into a little more here in a few minutes, but one of the drawbacks of loading all that data into memory is that you have to process all that data up front and then pick it up and put it into memory, right? And do all the compressions and all the things that are happening in the background. And then you're consuming it with the visualization tool. The intent of direct query is so that we can get that really, really quick, quote unquote, near real time capability to be able to pull that data back.
exactly.
Okay.
But there's a couple of catches here. And this was actually demonstrated at a previous Microsoft Ignite. So this is a couple of years ago. I actually can't find the session, but a blogger, James Serra, right? So
James
he's
is great.
very popular. See him at SQL Saturdays. He's a fixture in the Northeast. So in his blog, he talks about these performance improvements. And so here's the thing, right? So first off, straight up direct query, 8 seconds, direct query against materialized views, 2.4 seconds, which is what, 400% faster, right? Now we're going to come back to this part. We're going to come back to import Power BI 0 milliseconds, right? So that's the gold coin. But the gotcha here had to do with the nature of result set caching here. So, we got 154 milliseconds. Yeah, when you get a cache hit, right? That's great. But if you're the first one in the pool, um, cache isn't hot, so that's a problem, right?
Right.
If you don't get the cache hit, you get, the bad direct query performance, which is why, you know, BI solutions have these intermediate caching layers that we're going to talk about in a moment here. And you might say, oh gosh, I'll never miss the cache. I'm too smart for that. Well, it doesn't work that way,
Right.
right? Um, there are specific guidance around that. So two things, right? So the first thing is, our documentation straight up explains, things, here's what's not in the result sets cache. It's like, well, row level security isn't in there. It's like, well, that's kind of a gotcha. But more importantly is the interactive exploratory BI is not well served with this architecture. If it's, the Monday morning store report and it's the same report every Monday morning, great. Again, as long as you're the second person to hit the cache, you're going to have a great experience. But if you're like an analyst trying to understand, why things might have changed, and your query pattern is unpredictable because you don't know the answer yet. You're exploring, hence the name exploratory, right? So
Right.
that query pattern is not well served by this architecture.
Yeah,
But
and I think one of the things that you briefly touched on, but I think is really, really important to note here is around that security element. One of the real strengths of using Power BI is to be able to maintain object level, row level, column level security basically from end to end. So if you're using Cosmos in the back end, or if you're using SQL in the back end as your transactional database, all of the permissions that reside within that source database, all the way through to Synapse and all the way across the wire out to Power BI, is maintained when you're using something like analysis services in the background, or Power BI data modeling in the background, because you can maintain that row level security. Whereas with results at caching, you showed it right there on the screen, it does not support row level security and column level security. So that's one of the big gotchas about this.
yeah. Let me show you another. This architecture is a little less simple. This is the analytics end to end, right? So there's a lot of extra boxes here that we're going to see. But the box that I want to talk about here is putting a something between the visualization layer on the far right. You see lovable Azure Synapse Analytics on the left, and you see this thing in the middle. All right, and this thing in the middle is Power BI Premium. And if you're familiar with analysis services, it's playing basically the same role as analysis services. Microsoft's public long-term strategy is that Power BI Premium is a superset of Azure Analysis Services, which is the successor for SSAS. So here, both products are still available, right? So if you don't want all of the extra stuff on the right, you get the blue thing on the left. But the point is that Power BI Premium has all of this capability, which includes gargantuan models. And this is where we go to the trillion row demo. So if you liked the billion row demo, I think you're going to love the trillion row demo. And here we're going to see two things. So the first thing we're looking at is a gigantic data set, right? Literally a trillion row count. And then the second thing we're looking at is this interactive querying behavior, right? We really have no idea where he's going to go next with this experience here. So that's where we go with the interactive exploratory thing, again, over a much larger data set. And that is possible because of this little yellow box.
Okay, great. Yeah. And so we want to make sure it's known that Azure Analysis Services is not going anywhere, right? It has many uses. Yeah. It's still being supported. It's still having features added to it. There are still a couple of nuances that customers might use it for. I've got a fairly popular video, I did over a year ago that talked about sort of the pros and cons of analysis services versus, Power BI, premium nodes, embedded nodes, things like that. And a lot of those capabilities have been pulled into Power BI, which is great. Object level security and application lifecycle development and things like that. But analysis services still has its place in the world, especially if maybe you're not going to use Power BI ever, right? Sometimes those decisions are out of our hands. But I will say that, more recently I've heard that some competing products to Power BI are now putting limitations around how the data can be pulled into from Power BI that make it so that they're somewhat forcing the issue where they want you to use their back-end product, which is not as good. And so you have some challenges where either maybe you have to put all of your measures into your Power BI, into your analysis services models, or you have to build them all on the front end after you've pulled in the data. And that kind of gets away from the point of having that capability to have the measures built in. So I just think it's important to note, those kinds of things. But just use Power BI and it makes everything better, right?
Yeah. Well, so you're foreshadowing, as my high school English teacher would have said, you're foreshadowing a future vlog where we talk about semantic models and measures in more detail. The argument here for the box in the middle, and again, this is the powder blue Azure Analysis Services box or the Power BI Premium box. But what it's doing here is it's adding another level of aggregation. So let me just bring in let me just bring in a screen from the Guys in a Cube bananas performance scenario where they talk about this, right? So what we have on the right is Azure Synapse Analytics, and we have the details table, right? Billions of rows, trillions of rows, and the 10 to 30 second query response time, right? And then we've been talking so far about result sets cache, but also materialized view, which is an aggregation layer, right? It's summary level information maintained in the warehouse, but this blazing fast trillion row interactive exploration is happening because there's another aggregation table loaded into memory, right? So we've got some data movement here, but it's worth the cost of having this extra layer and this summary level data here because of the unique gift that Analysis Services and Power BI Premium has bestowed upon the world in terms of blazing query response time, right?
Right.
This is not SQL. It's using a different language. It has a completely different architecture. It would be a lousy point of sale database, right? There are many things this database does not do at all, right? So it would be a poor choice for transactions. But if you want BI reporting, there is nothing better. And that video that I showed with the trillion row sub-second response time is a consequence of installing this layer, creating aggregations above the aggregations. And this is what I would submit is the best practice architecture. It's all the above, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's all the above. So, it's not, well, I have to choose between materialized views or I have to choose between, the in-memory aggregation and it's like, why not use both? Right? That's how you're going to get, like, remember in the blog post, right? 0 millisecond. Okay, 0 millisecond response time. That's probably a little too hypey to put in there, but acceptable response time. How's that?
Yeah. And I think every scenario is a little unique, and you need to determine what that cost to benefit analysis is, right? And also by employing this methodology, if I could quickly summarize, and you tell me if I'm off, but essentially by using those aggregate tables, you're saying, well, hello, Mr. User, I know that you don't need access to all this data behind the scenes at all times. And so we're going to load the data that you actually need for this particular visual, this particular query, and it's just going to make it that much quicker for it to be able to respond and give you the visualizations for drilling and all that you need.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So this would be a function of good report design. So I mentioned at the beginning that the report may still access individual items in the billion row table, but if I can restrict the scope of that query against the underlying fact table, if I can make that scope, 1 day, 1 hour, one shopping cart, that is not a heavy lift for the warehouse, right?
Sure.
If I have to get, the summary of all day or all week, that's when the meter starts to churn on the compute and that sort of thing. And if I could just add, because this is one of the special sauce things of Power BI and the aggregation layer, is it's actually possible to have multiple layers of aggregation tables. So I'm in the Power BI aggregation documentation, and what I'm looking at here is the underlying fact table. This is a aggregation layer, an aggregation table at one layer, and then this is an aggregation at a higher layer. So you could have month level aggregation, week level aggregation, day level aggregation. And the reason these tables are grayed out is some of the functionality of Power BI, which hides this complexity from the report consumer and even the report developer. So I think I'm interacting with these base, and again, I don't want to get too much into the whole measures thing, but I think I'm interacting with the base underlying table. I don't need to understand all this stuff as a report consumer. And in fact, Microsoft is working on technology. We're actually in a public preview right now with a technology that can build these things for you. So those are called automatic aggregations. So Microsoft is continuing to invest in the scenario of aggregation tables as the soul of great BI performance. But again, you don't need the computer to make them. We actually have dialog boxes and guidance so that you can make these things yourself. But again, being able to stack up aggregations, not just in the warehouse, but being able to stack up aggregations inside of the BI tool, that creates bananas performance, to steal a phrase from the guys in theCUBE who originally demoed this. But also, frankly, at a cost competitive price point.
But I do have one magic question. So given this scenario, we talked about results at cache and how I lose that capability for my security aspects that I really, really want to maintain, but still have fast reporting. Does this maintain that for me?
It does, but
Great.
I don't want to rain on result sets cache, and the Power BI team's guidance is to push security as far up into the data source as possible, right? So, sure. Yeah, I mean, result set cache has its limitations, but I do want to emphasize that we still want to see security in the data source, right? We're going to preserve that, with single sign-on and what have you. So I don't want to go too far down that, but yeah, we preserve the, yeah.
Great. I mean, that's really what we want to try to help with, right? So, this has been really interesting. I like the idea of sort of looking at both capabilities to architect out what the best solution is, right? And having the understanding of, what we need to be able to build that optimal solution. And of course, you've always got that price versus performance equation, right? There's always that question. So, we're going to have a series of these videos. And so can you give a 2-second overview of what we'll explore next?
I certainly can. And we've talked about the yellow box or the blue box here in terms of query performance, but there's another important part that this layer plays, and that's for the enterprise semantic model. We're going to learn about what Microsoft calls internally KPI Lake, which is the one trusted source of measures, of computations. Whether it's daily sales or cost of goods sold or whatever the calculation is, right? Does every report author get to define, how Microsoft calculates profit and loss? Does everyone get to bring their own definition of these things, or can the enterprise agree on a single trusted source where important, and not just financial calculations, but where important calculations are stored and reused? And again, this has nothing to do with query performance, but it has everything to do with sane governance. And so there's a lot of value in this box in your Azure Synapse Analytics stack performing that function. So I look forward to talking about that.
Great. Yeah. I mean, I think the conversation very frequently comes back to process, people, and technology. And there's only one of those three that we can control, right? So great stuff, Chris. Really appreciate the time and looking forward to the next video. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you.